Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those on Zoom or watching us on YouTube, and welcome to this Sunday program of the Universalist Unitarian Church of Halifax. My name is Norm Rofker, and I'm proud to say that I'm the minister of this congregation, established here in Halifax in 1837. Jessica Friesen is our music director, Marie-Claude Leroux, our director of religious exploration. Paul Galbraith is our volunteer director and technician this morning, and Mary Lou McDonald is our service assistant. Thank you all. During the service today, the chat function will be open, and I invite you to extend hospitality by saying hello to anyone that you don't recognize or that you may not have seen for a while. You can also leave a message there for us. If you're not already receiving notifications from our church and would like to receive updates on our activities and services, then send an email to me, minister@uuch.ca, and we'll get you on our distribution list. Before we proceed, we have a number of announcements, some very important announcements. The order of the service for today was sent out over UU Info on Saturday evening, and it contains more detail on each of the following. First, I'd like to share with everyone that Sunday, June the 6th, will be a Bring a Friend Sunday. Please consider participating in this service by inviting family or friends to the Sunday morning service on June the 6th. And we've chosen this Sunday morning because we have a very special program with a guest, Peter Mayer, who's a member of the White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church in Minnesota, a very well-known, very well-respected music songwriter, composer, and singer. It's going to be a great musical service with Peter's profound reflections on some of the songs that he's written. Peter's been a songwriter for 25 years, and he has 11 albums. You may be familiar with his song Blue Boat Home. It's a UUCH favorite. He writes songs about our planet, the cosmos, and our part in it. And there's a link to his website in the order of service. And now, Jessica would like to make an announcement about Soulful Sundown on May 29th.
Good morning, everyone. We are very lucky to have Peter Mayer for the Sunday service for June 6th, and we had asked him to come and do a Soulful Sundown for June. So on June 12th at 7 o'clock, he will be doing a Soulful Sundown, which is going to be kind of like a mini coffee house type thing. And we also have Lane McNeil, who will be doing May's Soulful Sundown. There's Lane, and that will be this May 29th, a Saturday at 7 p.m. as well. You will get a Zoom invite. Please invite as many friends, family as you would like, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you, Jessica. Other announcements? Again, stay in touch every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. We host an online gathering. If this lockdown is getting to you and you need to talk to some friends, you can join us on a Zoom call every Thursday evening. The details, again, are in the order of service. There are a number of team meetings, well, two, in fact, coming up this week. If you'd like to attend these meetings, you can contact the chair or me. The first meeting is Dismantling Racism. That team meets every Tuesday, the fourth Tuesday of each month at 7:30 p.m. The team lead is Pam Griffin-Hody, and the membership team will be meeting this coming Thursday. Not the membership team, pardon me, the Dismantling Racism team. Also, the membership team will be meeting on Thursday. I hope I got that right. The racism team and Dismantling Racism team is meeting on Tuesday. The membership team, led by Pam Berman, is meeting on Thursday evening at 7:30 p.m. June newsletter deadline is coming up. You can submit articles anytime between now and May the 27th at the latest. And our annual meeting has been moved. We hope that everyone is managing through the pandemic In order to be as inclusive as possible, we've decided to move the UUCH 2021 Annual General Meeting to June 27th in hopes that we can have people in this space and do kind of a hybrid format service. And now Jessica will start our service with a prelude piece and some advice on how to endure the pandemic lockdown.
Let's start the service with "When You're Smiling, the Whole World Smiles with You."
Well, here we are again, staying the blazes home, and yet we have much to be grateful for. Many of us have received our first vaccinations, and our third wave is already receding. Summer's almost here and promising to be nearly normal. Citadel Hill is covered with beautiful yellow dandelions. Lots to be grateful for. And we are grateful for this congregation, which continues to think of others even during this difficult time. Your pledges are funding our programs and staff salaries, and your unpledged donations have kept our Saturday brunch and food box programs going. In fact, the minister's discretionary fund, which fills the food box, is ample at this time. If you are relatively new here and would like to contribute to the church's operating costs or the Saturday brunch, that would be great. If you are an old faithful, a donation is always appreciated. Either can be done by e-transfer to treasurer@uuch.ca or by check mailed to the church address, which is on the slide.
Each week at this time, we acknowledge our relationship to the original peoples of this land and our responsibility to be good stewards of the planet. This week, Margaret Galbraith will share her thoughts in this regard.
Thank you. We are meeting this morning in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded ancestral home of the Mi'kmaq. If you aren't currently in Mi'kma'ki but are tuning in to our service, please acknowledge the land in which you are living. This has been the home of the Mi'kmaq for thousands of years and still is today. Probably all of us on this call are immigrants or descended from immigrants. Until recently, most of us didn't pay much attention to the lives of the indigenous people who were here first. It just wasn't in the news. But today we are paying attention, and it is in the news. Sharing this land equitably has become an issue for all of us. In the last couple of weeks, we've learned of the push to get the federal Bill C-15 adopted, which will require our government to work to ensure that the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of the Indigenous People is enshrined in Canadian jurisprudence. You will all remember the confrontations leading to violence last fall when the Shubenacadie First Nation tried to establish their right to a moderate livelihood lobster fishery out of the DFO season. Last week, the Federal Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans produced a report stemming from that confrontation with 40 recommendations, but no real opinion on managing the basic issue of moderate livelihood fishing taking place out of season. And the Indigenous fishers plan to start this again next month, which is not within the DFO lobster fishing season. The United Nations also has a committee on the elimination of racial discrimination. And they were contacted by the Indigenous people after the confrontation last fall. They have also responded in the last week or two with questions to our federal government about the lack of effective support for the Mi'kmaq fishers. The news is not all about fishing and Indigenous rights. There is now a Mi'kmaq-led land trust established to protect the lands of Nova Scotia that are culturally significant, sacred, and ecologically unique. This has been a decade in the works, but is now established as, this one's hard to pronounce, Chispeteneminich Kimitkanu Conservancy. We are sharing our land with a sophisticated people who are coming back into their own. The UUCH Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Committee is working to learn how best we can work together for a successful future.
Thank you, Margaret. And now Mary Lou will read our chalice lighting words, after which I'll light the chalice here in our sanctuary.
Welcome to a new story. Welcome to a day unwritten. We gather to speak of possibility. We remember the losses, we celebrate the victories. As a people of story, we embrace the possible over the probable, weaving a story of hope. Join us in the new story. Join us in the day unwritten. Join us in the future of possibility.
And now Jessica will lead us in our opening hymn.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. Sing with me. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our stories from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with grace and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. One more time. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place,
Thank you. And now our Director of Religious Exploration, Marie-Claude Leroux, has a story for us about our theme for the month of May, which is story.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Today, I'm going to share with you a story about a man with a story. It's basically a story about stories, if you will. This is the Broken Story story by Reverend Christina Leon Tracy. Once upon a time, there was a man with a story. This wasn't any old once upon a time story, not one you could find on a bookshelf or hear around the campfire. This was his story and no one else's. This story had been carefully crafted. It began before he was born, and this story told of his loves and fears, his dreams realized, and his dreams yet to come. The story was complete. It told his whole life, including those bits that still existed in his imagination. In fact, the story was so complete, and he was so happy with the story, that he carried it around to make sure it was safe. It was somewhat bulky and unwieldy, but he didn't mind. It was his story. The thing about the story was, it was very fragile, made up of many pieces and held together by only his own imagination. He was worried it might break apart at any minute. And so he grew more and more protective of his story. He held it even closer. As he went about his life, he checked on the story to make sure that he was following it correctly. He avoided adventure and unknowns because, well, they might break his story. And then one day, the inevitable happened. Without warning, his story broke. It was unforeseen, and he hadn't done anything wrong at all. But there it was, laying in 1,000 shattered pieces on the ground, with the sunlight glinting off the bits of story he had so carefully protected for all those years. He was heartbroken. And since his story hadn't said to put the pieces back together, he was at a loss. What now? He sat down next to the pile of pieces and cried. A while later, maybe it was minutes, maybe it was hours, a group of people came out of the nearby building and saw him sitting on the sidewalk, surrounded by a pile of broken pieces, clearly in need of help. "What happened here?" a woman asked. "My story, it's gone. I worked so hard to build it, to protect it, to keep it from harm, and now it's gone. Gone," he wailed. "Is this the story here?" a man asked. "Yes, look at it. There's nothing left of it." "It looks like it's here, not gone," said a child. "We just have to put it back together." "Put it back together? There's no way. You don't even know what it looked like." "How will you put it back together if you don't even know me?" The child was tenacious. "Don't worry. With all of us here to help, we'll pull it back together in a way that you would never even expect. You never know. It might be more beautiful than before." And so they swept up the pieces of this man's story carefully and went together into the building from which they had emerged. They poured him some hot coffee and sang a song he had never heard before. Something about coming again and again, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. The song was soothing, and the coffee was warm. He began to feel hope again, that his story could be put back together. And it took a long time. Maybe it was days, maybe it was years, but they got it all back together. And they added new parts, and some old parts didn't fit anymore, but that was okay. The child had been right. It was more beautiful than before. And this time, the story was held together not only by his imagination, but the imagination and support of an entire community. It wasn't nearly so fragile. And it even allowed for adventure. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. Jessica will now assist as we take this special time to reflect on our joys and sorrows. It's a sacred time in our service. It's a time that we set apart to honor the many sorrows and the many joys that you, the congregation, are living, and to acknowledge the mutual support of this community. This morning, I'll ask Jessica to light a candle for all those who are here with us or in our thoughts or are struggling mentally, physically, financially, or emotionally. And a second candle for all the joys that are in the room. The big joys that only come along infrequently, and the little joys that we're blessed with every day, if we're able to see them. And again, we'll light a candle for all the members and friends of our community who are shut in one way or another in this pandemic. And maybe another candle for all of us who are suffering from COVID-19 fatigue. May this be our last lockdown. Each week I invite anyone with a joy or a sorrow to share at this time to relay their thoughts to me by email. This morning, Mary Lou would like to light a candle.
Yesterday, the Reverend Charles Edis, one of the founders of the Canadian Unitarian Council, and a friend of mine for more than 60 years, died in Montreal. As Canadian Unitarians, we owe him a great deal, and he will long be remembered.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I'm fortunate enough to have known Charles Edis in his retirement, and he had a wonderful long retirement, and just went into hospital, I believe, only about a week ago. This morning, we're going to light a candle as well for Mike Belland. Mike has been in the intensive care unit in the infirmary for over 2 weeks now with a severe blood infection. He's had at least 2 surgeries, with a third pending, I believe, and the doctors apparently have not identified the exact nature of the infection. Your care team has been in touch with Mike to the extent that that's possible, and with his mother, Marie, who lives in Truro. Mike and Marie both appreciate our help, our thoughts, and our prayers. I didn't receive any other notices for joys or sorrows this morning, but later, when we stop the live streaming on YouTube and before the coffee hour begins, I'll invite anyone else to share a joy or a sorrow and have a candle lit if they would like to do so. May both the joys and sorrows, both those acknowledged here this morning and those held in the silent sanctuary of our hearts, weave us together in the interdependent fabric that is our community. And now Jessica will present our reflective hymn.
Every night
Telling by Laura Hershey. What you risk telling your story, you will bore them, your voice will break, your ink spill and stain your coat, no one will understand, their eyes become fences. You will park yourself forever on the outside, your differentness once and for all revealed, dangerous. The names you give to yourself will become epithets. Your happiness will be called bravery, denial. Your sadness will justify their pity. Your fear will magnify their fears. Everything you say will prove something about their God or their economic system. Your feelings that change day to day, kaleidoscopic, will freeze in place, brand you forever, justify anything they decide to do with you. Those with power can afford to tell their story, or not. Those without power risk everything to tell their story, and must. Someone, somewhere, will hear your story and decide to fight, to live, and refuse compromise. Someone else will tell her own story, risking everything.
Thank you for that reading, Mary Lou. What you risk telling your story. The reading is about the risks that some of us face when we tell others our story. You may be ostracized, cut off, feared, pitied, used to justify others' preconceived notions, branded, oversimplified, stereotyped, pigeonholed, and discounted. You may be cast as a shallow victim of circumstances, a one-page summary of what is really a multi-chapter novel. The author of that reading says that those with power can choose to tell their stories or not. But those without power risk everything to tell their stories, and they must. Why? Because someone somewhere will hear your story and decide to fight, to live, and to refuse to compromise. Telling our stories, particularly for those without power, can inspire others, particularly if it's done in a safe place with compassionate, supportive listeners. But telling the story is only half of it, isn't it? The balance of the story is the listening. And those with power rarely want to hear the stories of those without power. It makes them uncomfortable. It challenges their own stories. For those with power, with available resources, it's uncomfortable to hear the stories of those without power. Such stories challenge those who think they deserve to be where they are. Such stories can be a call to action, a call to get involved, a call to change from a comfortably isolated role to a role of engagement. We're all people of stories. We tell stories as a way to give structure and meaning to our lives. We all view our individual selves as the protagonist in an interesting story. Our consciousness begins as infants when we begin to link individual events into a story. Our lives become not a random series of experiences, but an unfolding story with cause and effect, beginning, middle, and end, the arc of a narrative. We tell ourselves one story about ourselves. It's our life story, which ties our experiences together, making sense, making meaning of our lives. We're constantly updating and adding and refining that story as we encounter new experiences. But we don't incorporate everything, every experience into our story. That would make for an impossibly complex plotline. And so we choose what experiences we'll incorporate, we'll emphasize, and what subplots we'll return to over and over again. The story that we tell about ourselves will define who we are. And the more we tell and retell the story in a kind of echo chamber in our head, the more we narrow our vision and limit our own growth. The antidote to this is to listen deeply to the stories of others, to listen with a sympathetic ear. And that's why we need diverse congregations. In order to understand the human condition, we need to hear the stories of people in a wide variety of circumstances. And more than just hear their stories, we need to allow ourselves to absorb and be moved and to be changed and to allow our perspective to grow. The stories we tell about our life shape who we are and who we become. Why do we pick certain stories to repeat and others to ignore? I think our stories are really closely linked to our feelings. It's a feedback loop. Something happens to us that makes us feel a certain way, perhaps very good or perhaps very bad. We then incorporate that experience with those feelings into the story of our life. If we're feeling bad, perhaps we perceive that we were mistreated. Then we add a chapter to our story about how we've been abused. If we're feeling really good about an accomplishment, we add a chapter to a story about our achievements. I think our stories are driven by that emotional experience in our lives. And if we're dominated by negative emotions, our life story becomes a negative story. Truth is, we're not the best person to interpret our own story. We need people to listen, people to give us feedback. We're too heavily invested with our own egos. We too easily see ourselves as the victim of circumstances beyond our control, or on the other hand, the deserving beneficiaries of our own hard work, discounting the privilege that gave us the advantages over others. That is why those who can afford it spend so much time in therapy with psychologists, someone outside our story who can see it dispassionately. But one of the ways, besides psychotherapy, that we learn to get outside our own story is to engage in community, exchanging ideas and working on projects and getting us out of our own way. That helps us to see the bigger picture, the context of our lives. And that's one of the best aspects of a Unitarian Universalist congregation like ours. The story that we tell of our lives will be anchored in some belief system. From the time we're children, we hear stories about the way the world works, telling us the context of our life stories. From this, we create our own belief system, our faith. And as we become adults, we develop the ability to decide what stories we will choose to repeat. It's the stories we repeat about how the world works that will define our life story. It can be a belief system we develop for ourselves in the echo chamber of our own head, justifying our experiences and reinforcing our prejudices. Or we may become part of a community, like the UUCH of Halifax. Here we're presented with 7 principles against which we can test the stories that we tell about our lives. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, even the ones that stand in our way. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, even as we benefit from the inequalities in the world. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, even as many of us struggle with the concept of the spiritual. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning in a time when we can be overwhelmed with data and opinion. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, when the very institutions of democracy seem to be succumbing to a fatal level of polarization. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all when it seems like an impossible dream. And respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. At the same time that we're destroying huge elements of that web. Hey, I didn't say it was going to be easy. But here in this community, we have a sanctuary, a place where we can tell our story, where we can hear other stories in relative safety, learning from one another, but remaining individuals, each with our own story. The pandemic has changed many of our stories, both individual and collective. Taking our services online has opened a whole new vista for storytelling. I don't know whether Daresh is on the call this morning, but in recent services, we've been joined by a married couple, one Muslim and one Christian, living in Malaysia. If you listen to their stories, like me, you may have felt that the story you tell about the world changing your personal story. You may have felt that the story that you tell about yourself takes on a new context in this world that we live in. One of the stories that people my age like to tell is one called "Those Were the Days." Fond memories of our youth. As mentioned earlier, it's not important that the stories we tell are accurate. They are what we choose to remember. As an 18-year-old, I got to drive with friends from Thunder Bay, Ontario, to Montreal, Quebec, for Expo 67 and the celebration of Canada's 100th birthday. I have clear memories of strolling the grounds at Expo 67, beer in hand, singing the song, "Those Were the Days, My Friend," written by Gene Raskin, made popular by Mary Hopkins. Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We lived a life we choose. We'd fight and never lose, for we were young and sure to have our way. In preparation for the service, I looked up that song on the internet, and to my surprise, that song wasn't released until 1968. I never sang that song in Montreal. But never mind, I'm going to hold on to that memory. It's part of my story. Those were the days, my friends. It's part of my story. Jessica has an interlude for us.
I suddenly just forgot the beginning. And Norm?
Once upon a time there was a
Once
tavern.
upon a time there was a tavern. Is that how it goes?
Once upon a time there was a tavern.
Once upon a time there was a tavern.
Where we
We
used
could
to
use to raise a glass or two. Remember how we laughed away the hours. Think of all the great things we would do. Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We'd live the life we choose. We'd fight and never lose. For we were young and sure to have our way. La 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 stood before the tavern, nothing seemed the way it used to be. In the glass I saw a strange reflection. Was that a lonely woman really me? Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end.
We'd sing and dance forever and a day.
We live the life we choose, we fight and never lose. We were young and sure to have our way. La 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 la. Through the doors there came familiar laughter. I saw your face and heard you call my name. Oh, my friend, we're older but no wiser. For our dreams were still the same. Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We'd live the life we choose, we'd fight and never lose. For we were young and sure to have our way. And this will be a story that I will always remember, forgetting the melody and the words. So thank you.
Ah. We each have our own life stories, and nothing is more precious, just as the story that Marie Claude told us. The stories should be respected by all, heard with compassion and love, for they are lived experience. The congregation has a rich variety of people of experience. It's a place to learn from one another and to grow when we make it safe for people to tell their stories, and when we listen sympathetically without interruption. Those with power and privilege can choose to tell their stories or not. Those who are marginalized must tell their stories and be heard. It's those stories that point the way to a more just and compassionate world. If we are engaged with life, our stories will change over time. The benefits, the beliefs that I hold today have changed and expanded over time, thanks to the way many individuals have patiently participated in my story. Unitarian Universalism and many, many Unitarian Universalist individuals have helped to shape my life story within the context of our 7 principles. My life story and yours continues to evolve, and this congregation is a great place to grow and expand the limits of your life story. May it be so, and amen. And now Jessica will lead us in a closing hymn.
That I hope I can sing now. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you. Through the good times and the bad times too. Let this be a dance. Let a dancing song be heard.
The words for extinguishing the chalice and our closing words today are by Reverend Sherry Woodbury. May we have the courage to speak or write the stories within us that need to be told, the stories that make up our lives. May we listen with a loving mind and heart to the stories of others' lives, others here in this congregation and others in the wider community in the world. Let us choose with care the stories that we teach our children, remembering that all of our stories have power and that all of our stories are connected, for all of life is one. In the name of all that is sacred in these gathering hearts, may it be so, and amen. Thank you all who attended the service today by Zoom or by YouTube. I'll say goodbye now to those who joined us on YouTube as we end our live streaming. For those who joined by Zoom, in a few minutes, we'll return to sharing joys and sorrows, followed by our virtual coffee hour. Thank you again, and go in peace.
Those were the days, my friend.
We thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We'd live the life we choose. We'd fight and never lose. For we were young and sure to